The grid dies at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in February. Not with explosions or warnings, just a silent, total cut. Your lights flicker once, then die. Your phone screen goes black, mid-scroll. The hum of your refrigerator, that constant white noise you never noticed, just stops. Outside, streetlights blink out in sequence like dominoes falling. Within 6 hours, every city becomes a pressure cooker of panic. Within 3 days, the looting turns to violence. Within 2 weeks, starvation sets in. This is the reality of a cascading infrastructure failure. And in that first frozen moment of darkness, a single question separates survivors from statistics: where you are when it happens. And here's the uncomfortable truth that survival forums won't tell you. Rural life might not be the sanctuary you think it is. We've been sold a fantasy. The romantic image of the countryside as a survival paradise where you'll grow tomatoes and raise chickens while the cities burn. It's a comforting lie that ignores the brutal physics of survival. Because here's what actually happens when the lights go out. Rural areas lose power first and get it back last. Your well pump, electric, your heating system, electric or requires an electric starter. That propane tank in your yard, useless without electricity to run the appliances it feeds. The average rural home becomes uninhabitable within 48 hours of a total blackout, not despite its isolation, but because of it. Let's talk about thermodynamics. Because your survival isn't about hope, it's about heat transfer and caloric mathematics. A typical farmhouse built before 1980 loses heat at a rate of approximately 15,000 BTS per hour in winter conditions. That's the equivalent of running a space heater in reverse. Without active heating, interior temperatures match exterior temperatures within 18 hours. In a February blackout, that means interior temps dropping below freezing. Pipes burst. Water supplies contaminate. And that wood stove you installed, it requires seasoned firewood wood that's been dried for at least 6 months. The green wood from your property won't burn hot enough to matter, and it'll coat your chimney in creosote that can ignite and burn your house down around you. The physics don't care about your homesteading dreams. Now let's address the food myth with agricultural economics. Yes, rural areas have farmland, but modern farming is a fossil fuel-dependent industrial process. Those cornfields stretching to the horizon, they're not sweet corn. You can eat their feed corn for livestock and ethanol production, indigestible to humans without processing. The wheat needs to be harvested with combines, threshed, milled. Soybeans require industrial processing to remove toxins. Even if you know which plants are edible, you're looking at a caloric deficit crisis. The average adult needs 2,000 calories daily. A pound of foraged dandelion greens, about 100 calories. You'd need to gather and consume 20 pounds of plant material daily just to maintain weight. And that's before we account for the energy expenditure of foraging itself. The math is cruel and unforgiving. But here's where it gets darker: the human factor, the variable that actually determines survival. Rural areas have lower population density, yes, but they also have something cities do: armed populations with territorial instincts and a clear view of who belongs and who does. In a prolonged blackout, those charming country roads become choke points. That friendly farmer 3 miles away, he's now watching his dwindling food supply and counting how many mouths he can afford to feed. Social trust evaporates faster than you'd imagine when children are crying from hunger. The first wave of urban refugees heading to the countryside won't be met with hospitality. They'll be met with roadblocks and warning shots. This isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition from every historical collapse from Argentina to the Balkans. The actual advantage of rural survival isn't about where you are at. It's about what you know and what you've prepared before the lights go out. If you're already rural and already prepared, you have a 96-hour head start on the chaos. That's your window. In those first 4 days, you need to execute a specific sequence of actions that leverages your environment before it becomes a liability. First, water security through chemical understanding. Your well is dead, but you have options the city doesn't. Every rural property has a pressure tank, typically holding 40 to 60 gallons of already pumped water. That's your first reserve. Then you exploit thermal mass principles. If you have a hot water heater, it contains 40 to 80 gallons at temperature, drinkable if you drain it properly from the bottom valve before it cools and stagnates. Next, you're looking at livestock troughs. Pool water if you have it, even the water in your pipes if you open the highest faucet to break the vacuum and drain from the lowest point. But here's the critical step everyone misses. You need to treat this water immediately, within the first 24 hours, before bacterial colonies establish. Chlorine bleach, 8 drops per gallon, or boiling for a full rolling minute. The chemistry is non-negotiable. Second, you convert your rural liability space into a strategic asset through concealment and misdirection. That farmhouse lit up like a beacon. It's a target. You need to create the appearance of abandonment while actually operating from a secondary position. This means no fires visible from roads, no generator noise, no signs of habitation from the main access points. If you have outbuildings, a barn, a shed, a workshop, these become your actual survival stations. They're harder to spot, easier to heat with minimal fuel, and defensible from multiple angles. You're thinking like a guerrilla, not a homeowner. Third, you exploit what the city can't provide. Immediate access to combustible fuel sources without competition. But not firewood. That's the obvious choice everyone makes. You're targeting structural wood from your own property that no one else can claim. Fence posts, old pallets, the shed you were meaning to tear down anyway. You're also looking at agricultural waste corn stalks, burn fast but hot. Compressed hay bales can sustain slow burns, even dried animal manure once you get past the psychological barrier. The British heated homes with peat for centuries. Cow patties work on the same principle of compressed plant cellulose, but none of this matters without the psychological framework to execute it. This is where rural isolation becomes your actual enemy, because humans are social creatures and solitary survival is a cognitive nightmare. Studies of isolated populations show decision-making capacity degrades by 30% within 72 hours without social interaction. You start second-guessing obvious choices. You develop paranoia. You lose your calibration for normal risk assessment. The rural survivor who thinks they lone wolf through a collapse is statistically doomed not by resource scarcity but by psychological breakdown, leading to fatal errors in judgment. The solution is pre-collapse networking, but not the kind you're thinking. Not a militia or a survival group that attracts attention and testosterone. You need 3 to 4 nearby families you've already established mutual aid agreements with, specific, documented agreements about resource sharing, labor exchange, and coordinated security. This creates a cognitive load-sharing network where decision-making is distributed, skills are multiplied, and psychological resilience is maintained through human connection. When one person's judgment falters, the group corrects. This is how historical communities survive genuine collapses, from medieval plagues to 20th century wars. The brutal calculus of blackout survival comes down to preparation multiplied by knowledge, divided by the time you have to act. Rural life doesn't save you automatically, gives you different variables in the same equation. You trade population density for resource scarcity, infrastructure dependence for isolation vulnerability, and community conflict for psychological strain. The question isn't whether rural life saves you in a blackout. The question is whether you transformed your rural location from a romantic fantasy into a functional survival system before you reforce to find out. Because when that moment comes, when the lights die and the clock starts ticking, your location matters less than your preparation. The countryside won't save you. Only you can save you. And the time to make that decision is right now, while the lights are still on and the choice is still yours to make.